In the spirit of the holiday season, winter, and all other things overly frosty, I wanted to save these bad boys for this time of year. Now, if you're watching this outside of the winter timeline that this was released, then it won't make sense, but still. The Valhallen Ice Warriors are one of the most iconic Imperial Guardsmen on the tabletop. Their heavy winter coats harken to a World War II Soviet Red Army. Something that has become a bit of a staple when it comes to discussing these regiments of renown of the Astra Militarum is the stalwart and steadfast attitude of almost every regiment we've talked about until now. But Valhallen Ice Warriors stand out as a grim and resolute bunch. They're so persistent that they need to be completely eradicated from an objective before an enemy can secure it. Now, we've talked about drop troopers, gone into detail on the bicep flexing catachans. We've explored the intricate and ornate livery of the Vostroyans, but now it's time to delve into the icy background of the Valhallen Ice Warriors. On the tabletop, the Valhallen Ice Warriors have been part of the Imperial Guard as far back as the 2nd edition. Their old art is still some of the best Imperial Guardsman art out there. Joining the ranks of the Mordians, Catachans, Cadians, and Tallarn Desert Raiders, the Valhallans are some of the first regiments to come out of the codexes of the earliest editions. The very first one being the 5th Arcadian Regiment in the White Dwarf number 109 back in 1989, adding Imperial Guardsmen to the old Rogue Trader, the forebearer to what would become Warhammer 40,000. But there is a rich history for this regiment that has lasted the test of time, interesting both hobbyist and lore aficionado alike. So let's dive in on the Santa Guardsmen and talk more about the sordid past of the Valhallen Ice Warriors. Now, as we always do, we must first start on the planet that the Valhallans hail from. We've talked about jungle death worlds, worlds covered in toxic clouds, all sorts of planets that are hazardous to life either from the local flora and fauna or environment itself. But we've yet to talk about an ice planet, and Valhalla is just that. But it wasn't always this way. Valhalla itself is located in the Segmentum Ultima, just outside of the Warp Storm, the Storm of the Emperor's Wrath, and just to the galactic southeast of Varsavia, the home world of the Silver Skull's Space Marine chapter. In its earliest recorded history, Valhalla was a beautiful paradise world. Rolling green hills, sprawling blue oceans, and rich mountain views made up the perfect atmosphere of the planet. Sometime before the end of the Age of Strife, a large comet struck the planet. The planet's defense lasers tried to annihilate the comet on its trajectory towards the planet, but only managed to split off small pieces of it, like the movie Armageddon, but without a single Michael Bay trope. The comet itself was comprised almost entirely of iron, meaning the defense lasers, which were intended to deal with dense rock, could not chip away enough for the comet in time. The resulting collision was so violent that it shoved the planet far off of its normal orbit with its sun, pushing it to the furthest ends of the elliptical orbit around its star. Combined with the dust kicked up from the impact, Valhalla's climate radically shifted. I'd say overnight, but that kind of cheats the severity of a massive comet split in two slamming into your world. What was once a verdant paradise was now an icy wasteland, with temperatures so low that no creatures could live without some form of protection from the cold in the outside atmosphere. The small population left on the planet was forced to abandon the surface, delving into the deep caverns around their homeworld. A subterranean culture was born, eking out an existence by using the planet's core as a sort of heat source, or at least means of not freezing to death. But Valhallans are a stocky people, and stubbornly defiant even in the wake of a comet turning their entire world into a different environment. As their civilization grew in the areas beneath the planet's surface, Valhalla eventually created vast hive cities under the snowy and icy crust above it. Large ice-boring machines were created to carve out vast expanses for the further growth of the population. They might have lost everything above ground, but were able to synthesize food like most hive cities do, using vast food vats and other forms of feeding the populace. But the genesis of this great regiment was not complete yet. They were still a rather peaceful folk. The invasion of an orc war fleet would quickly change that around, just as fast as their climate had altered. the orcs made planetfall and immediately started raiding and ransacking the already scarce food reserves of the Valhallans. But the poorly equipped inhabitants of the ice world would not go down without a fight. Utilizing their intimate knowledge of the underground avenues that they themselves had created, the Valhallans fought back against the orcs. Regardless of their tenacity, the Valhallans were pushed back, but not without taking a mighty green tithe against their orc assailants. Deeper and deeper into their hive cities they retreated until they were at the heart of the food vats that acted as the lifeblood to their society. In this moment, the Valhallans devised a plan of using their ice-boring machines to cleverly strike through the walls and into the leadership of the orcs, killing knobs and warbosses alike. Each tunnel breach resulted in flamers gutting out from the massive machines, melting their way through the orc hordes as the Valhallans mopped up the rest. This broke the back of the orcs, who fled the planet entirely. And we've talked about how hard it is to get rid of an orc infestation, kind of like herpes, but with the planet's frigid temperatures, no orc could live on the surface for long, and the entire fleet left for orbit. The Valhallans didn't stop there though. The Planetary Defense Force pursued the orcs into orbit, utilizing the aid of other Imperial Guard naval elements to completely destroy the Greenskins. This was the true birth of the Valhallen Ice Warriors. A stalwart, stoic, and stubborn group of Imperial Guardsmen that would fight with such overwhelming tenacity that the Mortian Iron Guard would learn how to frown from these frigid badasses. The Departamento Munitorum was so impressed with the veracity of the Ice Warriors that their Imperial tithe extended strictly to the provision of Valhallans for the broader war effort throughout the galaxy. This of course mirrors the other death worlds that we've talked about that can only provide soldiers due to the landscape of said world. Now, I know this kind of sounds like a bit of a broken record, and I do want to address that real quick. You have to remember that there are an unfathomable amount of Imperial Guardsmen regiments in the Imperium. I mean, every single planet has a tithe of guardsmen that they are required to give, and almost all of them are absolutely terrible. They are victim to the usual guardsman trope of being mainly conscript armies that require the stern eye of a commissar to even keep fighting. So if the Imperium is over, let's just say 1 million planets large, I know it's a much larger number than that, and there are roughly, 20 to 30 of these regiments that stick out, that we know about, that's something like 0.003%. So, if it sounds like every regiment we discuss is, implacable, it's just because there are such a vast majority that are complete dog shit, and that's so it's worth repeating. But back on track. The Valhallans' nature is born from the same rock and ice that they have carved their civilization from in the wake of the Comet and Orc invasion. Overcrowded and unruly, Valhallans are governed by a strict set of laws that sees even the slightest infraction as punishable by death. The population is largely fed from the food vats mentioned earlier. A nutrient-dense sludge is served on a platter. A sludge that the citizens themselves harvest off the cavern walls to be cultivated then in the vats. But despite the hardships that exist, it is still a great honor to serve in the Imperial Guard, and as thus, the Valhallans have no problem meeting the Imperial tithe with such an eager populace. Which is good, because the Valhallans are widely deployed across the Imperium. And contrary to what you might think, the Ice Warriors are not exclusively deployed to icy or frigid climates, but rather they are used for two main purposes. Firstly, their stubborn and prideful nature makes them impossible to remove from a position, so they often are used alongside other guardsmen regiments to act as a strong central core, keeping morale high as they will not move from any ground once issued a command to defend it. Secondly, the Valhallans have an intimate knowledge of fighting against vast hordes of orcs. With their planet pushed to the brink of annihilation by the Green Menace, these soldiers reserve a special hatred for their nemesis. As thus, they are deployed to any engagement that deals with orc warfleets or WAs, as the otherwise morale-crippling assault of a greenskin army has no effect on the Ice Warriors. Which brings us nicely into the combat doctrines for these Russian, vodka-swigging, insane, mustache-toting badasses. The Valhallen Ice Warriors have a way of exacting war that is similar to the ice planet that bore them to the stars. As I mentioned earlier, Valhalla is a very crowded world, with little space that you can truly call your own in the tight confines of the subterranean hive cities. And this is then mirrored into the formations of the Ice Warriors, even duplicated in their art throughout the many codexes. Fighting in tight shoulder-to-shoulder formations, there is truly no personal space, as the Valhallans use the sheer weight of their bodies to press against the enemy and reinforce their own morale. It's hard to flee from the enemy when you're just, pressed up against them. Standing their ground in the face of insurmountable odds, the Valhallans dig in for the long haul, which wasn't meant to be such a wintry pun. Unwavering in their defense, the Ice Warriors are bolstered in their resolve by the constant hymns and prayers of Ministorum priests that fill their lines, filling the ears of the men with blessings prior to combat and during. Holding the line is all that matters to the Valhallans, and they do that gladly and grimly. As the enemy retreats or when the offensive is taken, Valhallans will use covering barrages from their artillery regiments to create a salvo of cover to move behind. Artillery will shell the enemy until the Valhallans can advance to mop up anyone cowering from the amassed explosions. Crawling forward, slowly and deliberately, the Ice Warriors will make their way to their objective, grinding the enemy down until they are victorious. This means of fighting has led to countless victories across the Imperium for the Valhallans, partly because it relies on the disciplined nature of the multiple elements of the regiment. The Ice Warriors, which is the name for just the base infantry of the regiment, is of course the backbone and main advancing block of the army. The artillery regiments are the shield by which the Ice Warriors advance, and the armored corps then falls in on the flanks and supporting portions of the Ice Warriors, adding to the punch of their offensives or additional bulwarks to their defenses. Many of you that have read the Ciaphas Cain novels will note that the Valhallan 12th Field Artillery is the very first assignment for Commissar Ciaphas Cain, also the regiment where he met his trusted aide and psychic blank, Gunner Ferric Jurgen. But now that we've talked a bit about how the Ice Warriors go to war, I want to discuss what they go to war in. And no, it's not Adidas tracksuits and furry boonie hats that we see in Russian rap videos. Instead, it's a uniform that is instantly recognizable. The heavy hats and thermal overcoats of the Valhallen Ice Warriors gives them their trademark aesthetic that has stood out over the years. But these overcoats are no simple winter protection. As we've discussed earlier, the extreme cold of Valhalla ensures that no one can traverse the surface without some form of cold protection. The great coat worn by the Ice Warriors has a thermal insulation that is seen in their helmets as well. Because of this thermal insulant, the wearer is relatively immune to the extreme climates that they would encounter on not just Valhalla, but other planets across the Imperium. When we take a look at, say, the Steel Legion or the Death Corps of Krieg, we see regiments that are used to fighting on toxic planets, or just ones with poisonous atmospheres. With the Valhallans, they are built for the natural extremes that are present on planets throughout the galaxy, and as thus, are well suited to engagements that don't deal with man-made toxic environments. Surprisingly enough, I've found nothing in my research that says that a planet that is overly hot is no less suited to the Valhallans than an ice world. Perhaps it's their grim, stubborn nature or just their high adaptability, but they find service on both planets just as easily. In addition to their trademark coats and helmets, the Ice Warriors lean very heavily on the use of their trusty lasgun, as every Imperial Guardsman should. Unlike most of the units we've talked about so far, there is nothing special about these lasguns. Rather, their preferred special weapons are the items that lean a bit more towards the regiment's preferred methods of combat. The Mortar and Flamethrower are two of the most widely used weapons across the entirety of the Valhallans. Flamethrowers work well with the densely packed close quarters of the Valhallans find themselves in during their engagements. With many conflicts against orcs, flamethrowers are perfect for stemming the flow of a massive green horde charging your front line. In addition, with such a heavy emphasis on artillery, it should come at no surprise that the mortar is also quite popular. Acting as a mobile artillery platform, the Ice Warriors can pivot firing solutions on the move, advancing with their assaults or quickly adjusting trajectory to deal with a new breach in their defenses. Mortars act as the backbone of the mobility aspect of the fighting force of Valhallans. While not a direct reference to their war gear, I did want to bring up that the Valhallans utilize a wide range of the Leman Russ battle tanks and their many variants. Demolishers, Executioners, Conquerors, Exterminators, and Vanquishers all make up the many tanks that fill out the armored regiments of the Valhallans, not to mention the presence of the Shadow Sword and Baneblade super heavy tanks as well. Each tank and artillery piece is painted in an intricate snowy camouflage pattern, befitting the homeworld obviously. And on that note, the planet's name is inscribed on the side or front of every single armored engine that the regiment uses, further kind of brandishing the proud name of Valhalla as the Ice Warriors surge around the armored vanguard of their fighting forces. But let's take that brief second to step out of the Warhammer world and look at how the aesthetic of the Valhallen Ice Warriors has been influenced. And unfortunately, there isn't a bunch of really cool tie-ins we can do for this one. This is truly a very straightforward copy. We get the same style of the Soviet Red Army during Operation Barbarossa and onwards through the Cold War. Not Operation Barbossa, which is a mistake I've made in a previous video. That typical kind of stereotypical Russian army winter gear that has been prevalent in the majority of pop culture, from video games to movies, is what we typically see, or what we actually see, in the Valhallans. What I do find very interesting is the naming mechanic of the regiment itself. Valhalla is clearly a Scandinavian term. We all know about the lauded and mighty halls of Valhalla that warriors go to feast, telling mighty tales and awaiting the end times with Sigmar. It's Sigmar, right? That's who they're all talking about. But anyway, I've always found it particularly odd that they are named Valhallen Ice Warriors, but their gear is entirely Russian. The ushankas that adorn every member of the Ice Warriors, from the guardsmen to the generals, is missing simply a red hammer and sickle for it to look like our timeline. And the coat worn by the Soviets was typically named a tulip. I know I'm mispronouncing that, but T-U-L-U-P, with a sheepskin lining, prior to the 1980s, when the Soviet military switched to Afghanka, a uniform system comprised of heavy cotton. Even when you look at the footwear of the Ice Warriors, you see the same thing used by the Red Army as well in the 1940s with the Valenki, the heavy felt boots of the time. That's V-A-L-E-N-K-I. Any of my Russian Bretons can gladly correct my pronunciation here. So aside from the sci-fi notion that everything has an insulated interior, the Ice Warriors are the spitting image of the 1940s Russian military. Lots of wool, or at least sheep-based garments. You know, don't put them next to a match or they'll just go up like a tinderbox. But before we talk about the current era of the Valhallans and bring our video to a close, I want to talk quickly about the Spinward Front, since we've talked about it with every other regiment. The Spinward Front is comprised of two forces opposing the Imperium: the Severan Dominate, a secessionist force, and Orcs. So you can tell that the Valhallans would be right at home in this campaign. Deployed to the planets of Sisk, Mesa, and various other ones throughout the subsector, the Valhallans have been pivotal in both stalling and outright halting Orc advancement across the sector. Coupled with their experience in harsh environmental conditions, the Valhallans have made up a good bulk of the fighting forces deployed to the Salixis sector. The preachers that fill the Salixian Synod, or think of that as a diocese, like a Catholic diocese. That might be the easiest way to translate the word synod. Have begun to pour into the ranks of the Valhallans, adding to their war fervor. Overall, the Ice Warriors see the engagement as both a blessing and grand stroke of luck to be facing their most hated foe in such an advantageous situation. Utilizing massive batteries of Basilisk and Manticore artillery regiments, the Valhallans are slated for an invasion of the Orc homeworld, Avidahal, against the mighty Orc warlord Grimtooth himself. But the real question is, what are the Valhallans in our current timeline, in a post-Noctis Aeterna timeline? With the Dark Imperium on us, all the many armies of the Imperium are scattered to the wind as the Cicatrix Maledictum rips its way through the center of the galaxy, splitting the Empire in two. The Imperium Nihilus to the galactic north, and the Imperium Sanctus, housing the throne world of Terra. And as you might have expected, this meant nothing for a force that was routinely used to being cut off from normal rations of supplies. The people of Valhalla had weathered much worse storms, and the disconnect from the grid that the Noctis Aeterna brought was responded with a mere shrug. The Valhallans continued to recruit, ration their supplies, and prepare themselves for when they would be able to rejoin the fray. On other planets, chaos corruption was rife, but the people of Valhalla were already under a strict set of laws, and absolutely zero corruption was able to take hold of the planet. Throughout the Imperium Nihilus, the forces of Valhallans fought on, where other Imperial Guard forces had halted, awaiting new orders. Whatever final commands had come prior to the communication blackout were exacted by the Ice Warriors. The slow, grinding machine of the Valhallans would not be stopped by the treacherous acts of the ruinous powers. Valhallans, with orders to defend, hunkered down and prepared to fight the long war. Those who had been issued to attack continued their steely, icy assault on the enemy. no quarter given, and not an inch backwards spared in pursuit of delivering the Emperor's wrath. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me on this journey through the frozen wastelands of Valhalla. The Valhallen Ice Warriors have always been a really standout and awesome force of the Imperial Guardsmen. From an aesthetic standpoint, from just a model standpoint, all throughout my lifetime in Games Workshop, or at least the hobby itself. In a rather homogenous 8th edition, we might not see these guys make it beyond this point in history, with a simple page mentioning them in the Codex. Hopefully, with so many diverse models coming out for the various Space Marine chapters and the rampant popularity of the Imperial Guard on the tabletop, we will begin to see the return of some of the flavorful regiments in the years to come. As always, guys, I want to thank you so much for watching here today. I've released this video just in time for Christmas, so if I don't catch you before then, have a great holiday, be safe out there, and remember, have a good one, and take care.